everybody to have this talk with me today. I want to introduce you to our audience. This is David Koerner. He is a professor emeritus of astronomy at Northern Arizona University. He's also a violist with the Flagstaff Symphony and an accomplished pianist. So we can all feel very small right now.
Yep.
And we are also incredibly pleased and proud that he's also a member of the board of directors of the Grand Canyon Music Festival. And one of the reasons I thought about how wonderful it would be to have a conversation with you, David, is because we had an amazing conversation, a fascinating conversation at the Barnes & Noble in Flagstaff a year and a half ago, about something you have taught courses on at NAU, which is the Indigenous perspective on astronomy. And
Yes.
I'm just going to give you the floor, and I can ask you questions as we go, but you're the one with the knowledge. I want you to tell us.
Well, okay. I've been a regular astronomer for quite a number of years, but of course here at Northern Arizona University, we are adjacent to a lot of Native American tribes. And a few years ago, a couple of Navajo astronomers began a course in native astronomy, and I was on the original proposal. And more recently, I began taking over the course for on-campus. It was originally online, on-campus presentation of it, and really enjoyed getting to know Indigenous perspectives on the sky. And I think they're more and more important to the national park system and to all of us in general, because we learn not just about the sky, but about the people who are looking at the sky. And of course, this all falls into an area which is an actual area of study called cultural astronomy. That might almost sound like an oxymoron if you think astronomy is just a science and science is not part of culture, but I assure you, we don't think that. It's the case that culture is our lens through which we look at the world, the physical world. And cultural astronomy is simply about the lenses that have been used to interpret the sky by different cultures and by present culture and in the history of present culture leading up to our scientific understanding. So I began to learn a lot more about it and teach about it. It typically gets divided into two subfields, one called archaeoastronomy, and that stems from archaeology, and it's the archaeological study of ruins and how they are oriented for astronomical observations. And they give us a clue to how native societies of the past interpreted the sky in order to understand the seasonality of the year, etc., and know when to plant crops. And they were quite sophisticated, actually, in even a modern sense. The other area, ethnoastronomy, has to do with even contemporary accounts of how tribes interpret the sky. And it was really a lot of fun learning more about that. There's lots more to learn. I'm looking forward to it. And this has to do with looking up at the sky and interpreting what it is you see. And today we're bombarded by science fiction interpretations of the sky as well as fantastical ones. And so even the modern day American has almost a mythological view of what's in the sky. And then modern astronomy has just gone crazy with high technology and our ability to observe the things that are in the sky. These different interpretations are not necessarily logically consistent, but they tell us about ourselves as much as they tell us about the universe. And so what's been very interesting is to talk about the ethnoastronomy of native cultures when we look at the sky and we learn about them and about ourselves looking at the universe as a whole. Think for a minute. If you go look at this dark sky, and maybe you haven't, and that's part of the problem too, is that in our urban areas, we have so much light pollution, you can't even see much of what's there. But even if you go into a very dark sky area, the sensory impact, if you don't know what you're looking at, is not particularly loud, so to speak. The stars aren't as bright as the sun because they're very much further away, not because they're intrinsically fainter. Most of the ones you see are quite a bit brighter than our own sun. They're just very far away. So if you, let's say you never ever had seen the sky and somebody hauled you out into a dark sky area and you took a look at it, what would you think? How would you interpret it? What would you even imagine it to be, right? And of course, cultures from time immemorial have done just that and developed their own stories and explanations about what it is they're looking at. And they're very beautiful, poetic, cultural, creative interpretations. And when we go to national parks, for example, there's a saying now. They say, half the park is after dark. And so when the sun goes down, the show is not over, and you get a chance to look at the sky in some of the darkest areas in our country. And you get this experience of trying to interpret what it is you're looking at. And of course, native interpretations have a lot of artistry to them. Even older historical Western interpretations were highly colorful and don't conform to modern scientific views at all. And so we have some of those embedded in our own culture. But the universe was kind of depicted as being very much alive. You're not just looking at a bunch of inert mechanisms. You're looking at a living universe. And so the stories of the different tribes tell many, many different stories about what that means to us here on Earth. There's a saying that the Hopi have in many other tribes as well. As above, so it is here below. And so there's this view that the sky is very, very strongly connected to what is going on here. Now, some of you may go, oh yeah, I'm a Taurus, you know. Of course, modern astrology has that same view that the events in the sky are connected to the events on Earth. That isn't exactly equivalent to a Native American view, but there are some similarities. One of my favorites is a little story I'll just tell. Those of you who know the constellation Orion are maybe aware that Orion has a belt made of 3 stars.
That's how you find him in the sky. You look for the belt.
Yeah, and they're very prominent. They're bright stars and they're equally spaced. And we're like, whoa, who put those there? Because they don't look randomly arranged, do they? To the Hopi, those represent the 3 mesa communities. And if you look at the outlying 2 shoulder stars, one includes Betelgeuse, and the 2 bottom feet stars, including the very bright Rigel, those are considered to be outlying ancient ruins from the Hisatsinum, the ancient peoples, and they actually name them in some of their maps, which ones they are. And it's believed that this depicts the migration of Hopi people from these outlying points into the belt, what we call the belt stars, into the current mesas. So it's this big image of migration. I don't know about you, but I know an awful lot about the stars in Orion as a professional astronomer, and it's pretty fascinating stuff. There's a lot of stars that are forming there. There's one star that's about to blow up. I mean, it's pretty amazing. But I still feel that my appreciation of Orion is enhanced by the Hopi story of migration. Now, if you go to another tribe like the Navajo, you have a completely different interpretation. To the Navajo, this is a kind of young warrior person, and there are 2 other constellations of men in different stages of their life, from the original Orion to Hosteen Sakai as a constellation of a man in middle age, and then you have an elder right around the constellation of Scorpius, and these form an arc of life. So they tell a completely different story, but one no less humanly interesting. And many of the other tribes, have these varieties as well. So what I think, yeah.
I was going to say, I will never look at Orion's belt the same again.
Right,
You
right.
know, it's no longer just Orion's belt. There's a lot more. Yeah.
That's right. And so I think the national park system has, like I said, half the park is after dark, has been enhancing their interpretation of the night sky with their rangers for visitors so that they can appreciate this more. But the other wing of this is that they're also trying to enhance people's understanding of adjacent native cultures to the national parks. Now, if you look at a map of the reservations in the Western US and a map of the national parks in the Western US and a map of the darkest sky areas in the Western US, there's an interesting correspondence there because the preservation of the national parks and also the situation of tribes in areas far away from European immigrant development, they tend to end up in the same place. But this is a great thing for us if we go as visitors to these places. We can appreciate both native cultures and dark sky areas and beautiful wilderness all in the same place. And so I think that coupled with this dark sky movement in the parks and the Native American championing of understanding of the local indigenous cultures, you can put these together and bring the interpretation of the sky from the native viewpoints.
Right, on a much more simplistic level and much closer to Earth, I grew up seeing the man in the moon. When I look up at the moon, I would see the man in the moon. And it was when I was on the Navajo Nation many, many years ago, and I was told, no, it's a rabbit.
That's right, yeah.
And now I look at the moon and I see a rabbit. I can't see the man. I have to struggle to find the man. It's like, well, there's the rabbit, but where's the man? But it's also interesting because I wonder about the sort of anthrocentric idea that from a European standpoint, we see a man. Of course we would see a man.
Well, there is a lady in the moon too, right? Do you know her?
No, oh my God.
No, yes, there is. She's easier to see than the man. I always thought she was much more obvious. She's kind of in a profile, and she has a diamond necklace where the diamond is a prominent crater hanging around her.
Oh my gosh! Now I have to go look for the lady in the moon. But I'll have to do it when I'm in Arizona because up north near the canyon, because I live in New York City and we can see the moon in New York and we can see Jupiter, but that's about it.
Right.
But I know what you're saying. I mean, we have the first few times that you actually see a truly dark sky, it's just phenomenal. I mean, the Milky Way, it's there. It just washes across the sky. And as my husband Robert Bonfiglio was fond of saying, he goes out before a concert, he looks up at the night sky and says, well, I guess it really doesn't matter how I play tonight, does it? Puts it in perspective.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that if the impact on your eyes of the stars is somewhat faint, but the reality of what you're looking at dwarfs anything you experience.
Right.
And so how do we, there's a great deal to be understood and appreciated from looking at the sky, but it requires interpretation, that great ranger word for interpretive rangers. And interpretation covers the gamut of scientific interpretation, cultural interpretation, artistic interpretation. I think artistic interpretation is incredibly important for us to know how we feel about what we're looking at, right? And the literary value of native interpretations kind of falls into that category, but then of course, so does music, right? So why is Grand Canyon Music Festival important? It's a very important interpretive wing of our understanding of the natural world, of the canyon, of the sky above the canyon, etc. And if I may go astray here a little bit, I have to also champion the relationship between astronomy and music. From antiquity, they were both part of the Greek quadrivium, right? And old musicians slash physicists really thought they were related. I mean, Galileo.
I've played music written by Galileo, his son.
Yeah, well, I mean, his whole family,
Yeah.
there's his brother, who was a great lutenist. There's his father, who started the opera guild. But I think stemming from Pythagoras, there was this belief in that period that the mathematical ratios between vibrating strings that produced our tones and intervals, in other words, musical theory, were operating in the solar system, and they had something to do with the spacings between the planets. I mean, so they were really intimately bound together. Now, of course, later on, Isaac Newton was not that much of a fan of music. Couldn't sit through a whole opera, for example. And after him, we had a more mechanical universe. But still, there were a lot of personalities that were both musicians, both astronomers. Of course, William Herschel, who discovered Uranus, was a musician for the first half of his life. Later on, you know, there's quite a list of famous musicians with interests in astronomy, including Naissance, who co-wrote a paper on the moon. I think too of Prokofiev during World War I, who wrote letters talking about his telescope, and he was a little depressed because World War I and other stuff. And he consoled himself with his telescope. And this is the period he's writing his great set of piano pieces called Vision Fugitive, Fleeting Visions. And you know, I can't help but think that some of those fleeting visions are of the sky, because that's what he was looking at the time. And so, although it's not necessarily the first thing we think of, I still think music is incredibly important to our interpretation of the natural world. And for me, it has always been.
Yeah, well, of course, I agree. And, surprise. One of the reasons for the timing of my conversation with you is that Robert Bonfiglio, our co-founder and harmonica virtuoso, started a project back in December to record the Hovhannes harmonica concerto. It's never been recorded. And in his little closet studio here in our apartment, he started recording it with musicians all over the country, string players, sending in their tracks. Of course, the pandemic hit, and then it's like, well, that's what everybody's doing now, right? That's how everybody's making music. So for him, it was like he just kept doing what he had been doing since December, so there was like no change in his schedule. And he's finished it now, and we're going to premiere the recording on Saturday, and I was listening to it, and to me, it conjures the night sky. It has this ethereal, mysterious, just night sky kind of feel to it. So I said to Robert, I said, we've got to find some night sky video, Grand Canyon night sky video that we can put to this, because it sounds like the stars to me. I can't explain it any other way. And a fellow named Tyler Nordgren.
Yeah.
You must know him. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah, he got in touch. I don't know how they got in touch with each other. Somehow they found each other. And he said, oh, I know about the festival, and I love Ed Mel's paintings. If you send me one of his posters, I'll send you my, my photographs. So a deal was made. But it turned out beautifully. It's absolutely stunning, that combination of that piece with, and of course Hovhannes was also always looking out at everything, you know, grabbing whatever he could from wherever he could. And it's a beautiful, evocative piece. I'm really happy with how it turned out. That'll be on Saturday. So I thought it'd be fun to have you talking with us. Prior to that, I'll put this conversation up, but also because next week we're going to do a weekend where we're going to highlight Puhutawi, which was our commission several years ago with Hopi composer Trevor Reed and Hopi musician Clark Tanakangba. and also have a NACAP night where we sort of feature NACAP. And so we'll post this for both of those shows. Just we have a few more minutes. One of the other things we talked about in Flagstaff last year, you mentioned this idea of imbuing what we would consider inanimate objects with a soul. And that is something also that's very common in the indigenous interpretation of the universe and the stars that we see. I thought that was also beautiful and fascinating. The way to us it's inanimate, and to them it's the opposite. It has a soul.
Right,
you know?
right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's a key part of what native interpretations of the sky have to offer, is that part of their sort of religious philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
And it means a great deal to me. If I can say a couple words about it, in the 19th century, when anthropology was just getting started with cultural studies, it was racist. There's no doubt about it. And they had this, and along with the kind of racist view they viewed what they called animism. In other words, the understanding of the physical universe as having personages or beings in it, as an inferior prior stage of cultural evolution that only savages still were involved with, and that modern man had evolved to this higher understanding, basically, of a mechanical universe. Good job, guys. You've gone from a beautiful universe of being to a machine. Progress, right? Well, I'm happy to report that in modern anthropology, there's been a better reinterpretation and understanding of animism, not as an inferior precursor to our great modern thing, but as a cultural interpretation in its own right. And it's very beautiful. Now, of course, we're used to the cry, anthropomorphism. Oh, you're making out something to be like yourself, But I think at bottom that cry has in it a false superiority of humans and a kind of overrated understanding of ourselves. Oftentimes, we still have an old dualistic notion of humans, that we have a soul spirit separate from a body, and that's what nobody else has. Nothing else in the universe has this thing that we have, right? Modern science and neurology would dispute that, of course, quite strongly, that we are, as a whole person, a body, soul, etc., this one single being, and that our brother creatures are the same, animals, etc. And you can go a step further, and people are, we don't really understand scientifically what we are. Let's first of all put that on the table. But as we move forward to understand ourselves neurologically, and even try to make machines that mimic ourselves from an artificial intelligence point of view, there's more and more debate about just what consciousness really is, right? And I'm so convinced that it's so poorly defined that I'm utterly unconvinced by the anthropomorphism cry. Now, there certainly are interpretations of constellations, for example, that don't look like a human person. I think one of my favorite notions is to the Navajo, the constellations are real beings, and you can be in contact with them, and they are important to ceremonies and to healings. I mean, one of my some of the famous sand paintings that they use in healings have key constellations in them, and they will have represented Father Earth and Mother Sky. That's their gender for those. And the sand painting is made to call those constellations down from the sky, and the person who's ill or being treated sits in the sand painting. And basically, these beings are kind of a little vain. They look down at a sand painting and they go, oh, look, that's me. I should go down there. That's if you draw it correctly. If you draw it crappy, they're going, that's not me, I'm not going. So you have to be careful. So if you have a great sand painting, it'll attract them to come down, and they'll come down and they'll have a kind of a unity with who's being healed sitting in the sand painting. And if that all works, then you need to destroy the sand painting so they can go back to where they came from, right? This is why sand paintings are traditionally not reproduced, for permanent viewing, because then you've trapped the poor constellation being in the sand painting. But that's a good example of a quite strong animistic view. The Hopi, of course, have Kachinas, which are animistic personages of natural phenomena. There's an interesting connection with a systems view of a person, where really our consciousness is an emergent phenomenon of our whole physical construction. Well, there are also emergent phenomena of complex physical structures that are not people. And you can think of them as autonomous systems that have their own agency. And then when you relate to them as you would to a person. And that's what the native view does. If you have kinship with some phenomenon, then it is a person. Whether it's a human person or an animal person or even a non-human person, if you have kinship with it, it's a person. This is in anthropology studies of tribes in India and also the Ojibwe here in America. Well, I much prefer this view to the mechanical view, the Western view, that all the rest of the universe is just a bunch of inert matter, and it's our job as humans to control it all for ourselves. It's been put here for our benefit, and we're in charge, and we need to take charge. Well, that leads to a lot of mistakes, right? Environmental mistakes. We look at the natural world and we don't see ourselves as a part of it. We see it as a commodity just for our use. And we go where angels fear to tread. We march in and go, I'm going to dig up all this stuff, use up all this. We don't realize that the whole biosphere, the natural world, is a ginormously complex ecosystem which we are a part of. And we need to appreciate its agency, its autonomy. Well, that is a traditional Native American point of view. It's a point of view that's better than the one in the mechanical universe we have come to things with. We can learn a lot by paying attention to the native view of nature.
David, I could talk to you forever, but I'm on Zoom and I only have 30 minutes. So we're going to have to wrap it up.
Right.
I really look forward to seeing you soon in person.
Yes.
Once we get this whole virus thing.
Yeah.
But stay healthy, stay well. It's great to see you. This will be up. Tune in this weekend. Robert's concert is on Friday. The Stars Night Sky is on Saturday, along with some other music as well. So we'll see you soon.
All right, thanks.
Thanks so much, David. Talk to you soon.